Welcome to the special edition of Visegrad Inside video podcast. It's the first time that we record this as a special guest in this setting. I'm particularly happy to welcome a special guest in this podcast, Wolfgang Münchau from Eurointelligence, and the premier boutique intelligence service on economy and politics in Eurozone area primarily, or at least seeing the world through this lens, and an author of the Kaput book that has been still very much a discussed publication across Germany, across Europe, because of all the significance of German economy to the European economy. And also published in Polish, and I guess many other languages. I wasn't following on how many of those. And we're going to talk about exactly how your assessment from the book overlaps with the assessment of the policies governments and are trying to in a way to answer to the problems that you identified very properly, I think, in the book. My name is Wojciech Przybylski. I'm editor in Visegrad's. My name is Wojciech Przybylski. I'm editor-in-chief of Visegrad Inside. See, the stress has eaten me up. And Wolfgang, first I wanted to ask you, are you a pessimist by nature?
I'm not. No, I generally not. I'm very optimistic about. In fact, I'm very optimistic about the United States. In the long run, despite where everyone else is pessimistic. So I'm not. I have been observing Europe for a long time. And what I am seeing, and I'm seeing a very consistent picture. This is not like, it's not like Europe, this is just started. This has started a long time ago. And what happened is that Europe has integrated to a certain extent with a single currency. Now Poland is not part of it, but Western Europe is, with a single market. And we have common problems these days that we are not solving. And the way the European countries are working, the way the EU itself is working, means that we are not solving these problems. We are papering over them. We're launching programs, artificial programs with big names and big numbers, but we're never solving problems. I mean, if you just look at the recovery fund from the pandemic, it has was supposed to raise productivity growth. It didn't do anything of the sort. It was just another slush fund, European slush fund. In Germany is massively dependent on 3 or 4 industries. This is an extraordinary dependence that was created. I mean, here in Poland, everyone is focused on Germany's, dependence on Russia, and Germany's dependence on China. And in fact, that dependency is sort of a derivative. It's the consequence of Germany's dependence on a few industries. And now, Europe is probably more diversified than Germany as a whole, and Europe could probably play sort of like a United States. I mean, California is dependent on high tech, and New York is dependent on finance. So everybody has their dependencies, but the United States as a whole is not dependent. But we Europeans are not using this, and we have become, we are in a financial, in an economic downward stretch. Again, Poland is an exception here. Squeezed by America, squeezed and China, and we haven't got the instruments and the political unity to counteract that.
Yeah, well, that already gives anyone who hasn't yet reached for the book a bit of a perspective of what you can find in the book, which I do recommend. It's a must read to assess how bad the situation is. That's why I was asking if you're a pessimist by nature, and it seems you say you're an optimist. That's good. The old pessimist optimist joke says that things are as bad as they can get, says the pessimist. The optimist says no, they can get worse. And my reading of your optimism is exactly that. Now, in the book you write, and you just characterize this dependency on industries, neo-mercantilist policies of Germany that has been the design of German political and economic model for decades, especially throughout this 20th century. But I think they've been most pronounced in the prime age of globalization. I don't know if you would agree with me, but the past 30 years was the prime time of globalization. I mean, this was the success story of Poland. We will come back to Poland and Central Europe as well in a moment. But primarily we have seen Germany grow exponentially through the policies that you now criticize in the book, which is export driven. We have seen Germany ripping off profits of the globalization at a record scale. So tell me, what went wrong maybe with globalization? Let's take a big picture. So that Germany no longer is able to repeat this miracle. What happened there?
I mean, what happened with globalization is that, and it's something that macroeconomists never saw, because for them that was the most natural way that countries specialize. The fact that some country had a trade imbalance like America didn't matter, because from a macroeconomic perspective, that was not only sustainable, that was actually a positive thing. It was a feature, not a bug of the system. But what changed is that the globalization produced losers, economic losers. And whereas sort of economists tend to focus on aggregate data and on per average data, GDP per capita is an average, it's not a median. And average data and aggregate data don't capture these distributional effects. If you add the effect of the financial crisis and the effect of quantitative easing programs, which had an enormous impact on stock markets, but were paid for through austerity and fiscal policy, then you saw basically a disconnect. And I sort of observed this in the UK. Did not observe it so much in Germany, but in those years, in sort of the years 2000 to 2015, so the first 15 years of this decade, Germany appeared to do very well, and you described this correctly. That Germany's mercantilism, which is seeking export surpluses. This isn't exporting; it's surpluses. So this became a system. If Germany didn't generate a surplus, Germany was in recession. Germany needed it like a drug addict. And the surplus, I've always warned against this, because you make yourself vulnerable against shocks which you do not control. I mean, the first of these shocks was Brexit. Then came Donald Trump, first term, which in Germany was widely underestimated. They didn't think he would last. He wouldn't do it. If he did it, then the stock market would correct it. There was always something that would make sure that we're going to be fine. And that wasn't the case. He was re-elected, not in 20, but in 2024. And the tariff policy is now complete. But the bigger problem than Trump for the Germans, and this is what they also didn't see, is that China was a complementary country and became a competitor. So, the first China shock hit America. It hit Italy. It hit some parts of the UK. But the second China shock hits Germany. And that's because China is no longer, China is actually one of the few countries in the world that runs a large export surplus against Germany. Because the Germans are struggling to sell their cars to China, to sell their products to China, because the Chinese do their own thing, and they are actually not only price competitive, more importantly, they are quality competitive. And this is something that Germans have not experienced before, that in the sort of areas of their specialization, mechanical engineering in particular, the car industry is part of that, that others can be as good as they are. And this is not an imitation game, as we always thought the Chinese to be. China has actually learned. China is innovating, and in some areas innovating way ahead of us.
And I would not say it's only economy that China plays. It's the economic policy. It's actually the politics of the Chinese Communist Party that sponsors this massive economic toolbox of exports, of made in China priority to make China the dominant player at whatever domestic cost in terms of overproduction. in terms of manufacturing, in dominating the world and making, as you say, the world an addict to Chinese exports. So I don't want to compare Germany model to Chinese model. Definitely, Germany did not have political ambition in winning.
That's the difference.
Winning the globalization game, but it seems that China has not only political. I would say you call China competitor in this game. I would say that even from the European perspective, it is being now considered a rival. An aggressive rival, also in the context of support for Russia, which intends to change the world order as we have learned to live with it over the past decades.
The West has a long history of misjudging China. It started in the 80s and 1990s when China's modernization drive was widely interpreted as a reform. And they were all, Deng Xiaoping was called the reformer. He wasn't a reformer. He used Western methods to strengthen communism. China didn't have reformers. China's had disagreements about what method to use, as any country, has disagreements about policies. But there was at no point anyone in the Chinese leadership who gave up on communism. President Xi's strategy is significantly more ambitious. He is not an economic optimizer. He does things that economists think are unsustainable. He is basically pursuing aspects of the German model on steroids, you could say that, but as you rightly say, the important addition of achieving global dominance. And we saw this example, it's a very recent example. The Dutch government has essentially nationalized a chip maker called Nexperia. The Chinese have immediately retaliated by blocking the companies, because the company was owned by China in the Netherlands, but the Chinese have immediately retaliated by blocking Nexperia's exports. And within days, this caused supply chain issues in Europe. And as we heard, just a few days ago, the German car industry may, in the next few days, grind to a complete halt because of supply chain issues. Very much like what happened during the pandemic. During the
COVID, yes.
And that was just basically, China retaliating against sort of, Europe, a European government trying to play geopolitics. Now, that's very clear that, with all respect to the Dutch, they cannot play geopolitics. And the fact that, Germany cannot play geopolitics either. We're too small for that. The EU could. Mm-hmm. But the EU isn't organized that way, because the EU has, there is a thing, such a thing as a Dutch government that takes the decision, and we're taking these decisions at national government. The German mercantilism that I described in my book was a national policy. It wasn't coordinated with anybody. The Germans did it just to the heck with it. And when they built Nord Stream 2, they didn't ask Poland, did they? No? So they basically, the Europeans, we formulate all our industrial strategies ourselves, and we have created a massive collective action problem that the European Commission cannot solve alone. We can't blame the European Commission. They make mistakes, and I think they've made big mistakes. But the issue isn't that. The issue is very much that we have big geopolitical issues that require a very different form of organization in Europe, mm-hmm. and a significant degree of centralization in decision making. And also that obviously would require democratic legitimacy. It goes to the heart of European treaties and political union and all this discussion, something that European leaders did not want to have, because it would be difficult, then you might not get majorities, and we probably wouldn't get majorities. So we are in sort of we are stuck in a situation in Europe where something needs to happen, but it cannot happen, and so we're trying to get our way around it through meetings and but you see, when the European leaders visited the White House and they were all sitting around the desk of Trump, it was embarrassing, and ultimately, it was also ineffective. So this is sort of where we have landed in Europe. We are not prepared for a world in which we were not prepared for a return of geopolitics.
But we were talking about geopolitics in Europe, and the first commission of Ursula von der Leyen talked about geopolitical commission, which in fact meant geo-economic commission. It meant that they wanted to identify, or they would say the all member states and the commission recognize that the world is turning around, not in the direction that was expected or hoped for from the European Union. And then there were a number of policies that the Commission has been trying to elaborate ever since. There was the Critical Raw Material Act, there were policies, anti-coercion instruments that the EU has developed. And I agree with your criticism that, I mean, designing toolkits and policies is not getting things fixed, and Europe did not manage to eventually fix its vulnerable position to actors like China or the US when those players enter into the field and change the rules of the game to their advantage, or maybe even to their disadvantage, but certainly to the disadvantage of the European Union.
But the EU has all these. The EU has all these things. I remember when the Stability Pact, the Fiscal Pact, was agreed. Yeah. They had an anti-coercion instruments. They had a fine they could levy on. It hasn't been used once. The anti-coercion instrument hasn't been used. Maybe it will be used now against China. But we saw with the Netherlands what happened. Now, if the Chinese cut us off the rare earth, the European defense recovery is dead, because we are absolutely dependent on China's rare earth for our aircraft programs, for our defense spending increases, unless we buy everything from the United States. And even the United States is dependent on this. So China has a, you could call it, people used to call it a stranglehold, now it's called a chokehold, but it's China is using these dependencies in a brutal way for which the EU is not prepared. Mm-hmm. So the anti-coercion instrument, even if you used it, it gives you a legal space to do something, but you would need to act significantly more discretionary. Mm-hmm. You'd have to expel Chinese engineers. You have to, if you want to really fight them, you don't have to go really much. You've got to be much heavier than this, and this is something the Commission can do. So the Commission has very limited powers. It has trade policy powers. It can impose trade tariffs. Yeah, we know they have the ability if they get the requisite votes in the Council. They have these instruments, but this is not comparable to the instrument China deploys. And China, on the next period thing, they just reacted like this, in a speed that we're not preparing for.
No. Yeah. No, I agree, of course. At the same time, I would argue, as we argue in Visegrad Insight and in the Respublika, that this partnership model of growth, and Europe behaves as if it wanted to upkeep, because there is no better game we can play, WTO rules or similar rules for the global trade and partnerships. It recognizes, and it tries at least, to back it by force, to develop a credible defense posture that, of course, China knows how to undercut, the case you just provided. And the other partners are not immediately super helpful, but still the effort is there, and certain production of certain types of essentially hardware in the military is becoming a new European paradigm. It's a paradigm shift, because now Europe is both looking at the competitiveness, maybe I would say less optimistically, but continues this mantra of seeking for competitiveness. And
which makes no sense.
They have Holy Grail.
They have a trade surplus. Why do you want to compete? I think this is one of the other problems. Is they focus on the wrong thing.
And it wants to have military credibility in the world, because the world requires that you have at least means to defend yourself or to deploy military hardware. But we are in a transition zone, and you mentioned that there was a discussion and this humiliating picture of European leaders at the Trump's table. Now, I would beg to differ on the evaluation, on the assessment, and I don't like the picture either. I think it was humiliating, and we have seen Polish president in the previous Trump administration humiliated even more, as he was bending his, not even knee, he was bending over the desk to sign a memo with Trump where he was comfortably sitting as the boss, like in the Godfather first episode. With Marlon Brando basically treating
François Mitterrand and Helmut Kohl would never have done this.
Of course, this was not a European type of.
They would have left the office.
Yeah. But what you achieve eventually, and I think this is my disagreement with your perspective, is that they have managed to sway for the time being, and time here is critical, the attitudes of Trump on Europe and Ukraine. And it's not stable. It's not a strategy that has been influenced. But at least Europe has demonstrated it has toolbox to influence US policy on Ukraine, which is of vital interest to the whole European project.
I beg to differ completely on this. It's not that Ukraine is not important. Getting Trump to be engaged in Europe is futile. It will fail. The Trump is always reverting to the position, and we saw this last week. He had a phone call with Putin. The tomahawks were suddenly off the agenda, and then Putin goes home and continues without any change. I wouldn't say that Trump is on the side of Putin. I don't think that is quite right, but I would say that Trump is totally equidistant politically between Russia and Ukraine, personally closer to Putin than to Zelensky on a personal chemistry level. The US, because of its support, membership of NATO, and its alliance with Europe, which is still there, feels a need to support Ukraine, at least verbally, through sanctions. But the idea, and the Europeans are always clinging to the hope that there is some America that does bail us out, because that's always happened. And that is where the mistake occurs. Now, if the Europeans were serious about Ukraine, and I don't think they are, the Europeans talk the talk. But we've seen in the last 2 months, weapons deliveries to Ukraine from Europe have fallen quite significantly. The Europeans are not only not making up what's missing from the United States, they're actually spending less money. And if I follow the debate in Germany, where a country that spends a lot of money on welfare, on its citizens' income, Olaf Scholz, whose party is still in government, even though he isn't, said there is no way he would sanction, or his party would allow a reduction in welfare for the sake of increased military spending or for the sake of Ukraine. That's the reality. Look at what happens in France. This is a country with a debt problem, a debt crisis. France, President Macron talks the talk. France is one of the lowest spenders on Ukraine. So I think the Europeans are hypocrites. Yeah, they embrace Zelensky, they talk. But in the end, without the United States, and that is the situation, without the United States, there is no pathway for Ukraine to victory. The question is what pathways there are, and what I see in Europe on Ukraine is yes, support and continued. There are weapons deliveries, there is financial support, but there is nobody in the EU with a strategy for Ukraine to achieve any specific military objective. And that is something that where I see, if the EU, the way it is constructed, is not ready for war.
Yes.
It's simply, basically, this is what we're seeing here. And yes, we managed to get Trump to turn around for like a month. That was the period between Alaska and the call last week. Maybe it was 2 months. That was sort of what we achieved. And that gave us another 2 months in which we didn't solve the problem. So no, I disagree strongly. I believe that if Europe is serious, and I'm just phrasing it as if-then questions, because I don't have strong views myself. I try to understand what happens. So I'm not an activist. I'm not saying what's good or what's bad. I'm trying to say, if you want victory in Ukraine, you have to basically make some sacrifices. It costs you money. It costs you real money, and it costs you will really also take risks.
Yes.
And you're not willing to take the risks. And it's very clear that nobody in Europe is willing to take those. Nobody is willing to even consider the risk of engaging with Russia, because that might draw to a wider war, and people have concluded that it's not a risk they take. I probably agree with that, but at the very least, they could have supported Ukraine's, with the weapons Ukraine needed, with the air defense system, with medium-range missiles. This could have happened. It would have needed to happen earlier. I don't think that sending some German missiles to Ukraine would, at this point, turn the war around. I think we're already, in a position where it's going to be very late.
Yeah. The moment of leadership for Europe might have been gone. I think German leadership in that respect might have been also gone, because in Germany, bringing the focus and attention back to the book and your evaluation, one of the conclusions in the book is that German political and industrial elites are not able nor capable of designing really strategic moves on the global scale. And you mention unpreparedness for war. We leave our disagreement on the Trump. Probably I would evaluate it comes from my optimistic assumption it could have been worse, should they not have gone to DC at this particular moment. But we leave it aside, because you said something very important. Europe is not prepared for war, and I think in the strategic mindset it is not, and also in institution it is not. But we see certain developments, and I wanted to enumerate a few. 2023, Germany has published its own national security strategy, first of a kind. And Annex 1 is on China, also recognizing and trying to address these vulnerabilities in an organized German way. I wanted to hear your views on that, also in the context of what other countries or entities are doing. There is a European Union economic security strategy. This follows through from a number of other attempts. The UK has been trying before. Japan probably was one of the first, more specifically on the technology dependency on China years back. Australia has been recognizing this threat as an economic security threat to their security system earlier before. But looking at Europe, with Germany taking this early baby steps even in building up a security strategy, what's your take on that, and how optimistic or pessimistic are you about the shift of the direction?
I'll tell you a story. A Finnish company wants to build tanks in Germany, and they're building tanks in a small region in Germany, in the Saarland, which is the small region bordering France. And when they heard that this was happening, 5 German states made a protest against the decision. These happened to be 5 German states that had Rheinmetall factories in them. So even in a situation like today, where we think we have an emergency, the instinct, the German political instinct, is, oh, my little state first, my production side first, because I don't want competition from. I don't want competition. Basically, that's what it is. What you said, Germany has done this, the EU has done this, and I'm hearing this in so many other areas as well. Investment. The EU has invested less and less into research in the private sector, research and development. Public sector is holding up, but in the private sector we're falling. Now, if you actually, if you discuss this, there's always somebody who says, yeah, but the EU has done this, and then we have this program, and then we have that program. And yeah, on military, yeah, we have the Munich Security Conference, and we do this, and we do that. And the reality is that we do not have the capacity. So I judge it by the data. I don't care what they do. I really don't care what they do. I see what they do, because I see the outcome of what they do. And another Commission program, Ursula von der Leyen declaring the EU to be a geopolitical actor, it's stupid. I mean, either we are stupid to believe this, or she's stupid to say it, probably a mixture of both. It's stupid. The EU is not a political actor. The Commission doesn't have the geopolitical tools to be an actor. The Commission it doesn't have a budget. It has a budget that's allocated to all sorts of transfers. It doesn't have a discretionary area. It is not a geopolitical actor, and I think we should start with that realization that it is not a geopolitical actor, rather than pretending that we're going to play a big role at the next G7 meeting, because from a perspective of the President of the Commission or the President of the European Council, Well, they think they are political actors because they're at the G7, G8 meetings and they can, or G20 meetings, and they can shake hands. That's not what we mean by this. So the question is, let's get real. But if we keep on sort of pretending that we're doing this, and yeah, I mean, what happens in Germany? They are raising defense spending. We're seeing this, and I think to the tune of the reasonable estimates I've seen, 0.2 to 0.3 percentage points per year. This is better than nothing. It's not much. The problem that I see in Germany and Europe in general in defense, we are spending less than the Russians in total, but the efficiency of our defense spending is significantly lower because we are duplicating everything. So the issue that needs to be addressed, if we were serious, and we are not serious, what I talked about Finland, look at the French-German fighter project. They are basically putting it on hold because they cannot agree on the work share. This is all about, everybody is all in for themselves. There isn't what you would need to, if you were serious, you would say, okay, we're going to do this. We have we're going to have, this is the fighter aircraft, this is who will build it. And I don't care if anyone protests. This is a national or European-wide emergency, and we're going to do this. But this is not how the EU works. It's not a top-down, organized thing. So in order to meet, and the estimates that I've seen, in order to meet what Russia is spending on defense, we would probably have to raise our sort of military investments to like $1 trillion. That's just for Ukraine. So when we sequester the Russian assets, like $150 billion loan that we're considering, but we're not doing it for real because we fear that there might be some repercussions. So we're constructing essentially the same as a subprime bond, a bit like the instruments of the global financial crisis. Complex, nobody really understands it, trying to hide the risk, nobody really knows who's ultimately responsible. This is not how you win wars. So I think if we were serious about helping Ukraine, we would not act that way. And that is why I think we are not serious about Ukraine. But we're pretending we are. In that sense, Trump's position is significantly more honest, in the sense that he is not helping Ukraine and he doesn't pretend to help Ukraine. It's at least consistent. Whether it's a right decision is another matter, but it's a consistent decision. But I think what we are doing is worse, because we are ultimately not ready to make the sacrifices, because we're prioritizing our own factories, and that's the mercantilist mindset. We are mercantilists. For us, this is a business opportunity. Trump talks about these things all the time in a very sort of brash way, Mara, Gaza, and stuff like that, and we find it, and we are appalled by this language. But we do the same. We are mercantilists, and even in a situation that, by common agreement, that I would agree to, is of strategic utmost importance to us. We do not do this.
We are not walking the talk in Europe. I certainly agree with this assessment, and there is much more talk and hot air balloon in the air rather than real military stuff, hardware flying to protect our skies and to protect Ukrainian skies. But that would be also unfair to say that the type of support Europe has delivered to Ukraine was insignificant.
That was insignificant. I would say it was insignificant because, if you go to war, you don't say it's a lot. You say, does it get the job done? And if it doesn't get the job done, it is insignificant. I'm sorry, it's not by the standards of what we normally do. It's not by, this is the European talk. We did more than we did last year. It doesn't matter. And no strategic planner in the United States would say, we increased our military budget by 100 billion. We're losing the war, but we did rather well, didn't we?
Yeah.
That's not, if you're strategic, you say, you have very different yardsticks. And yes, it is insignificant, and because they could have trebled that, they could have quadrupled that.
Yeah, and in order to be strategic,
this is the richest part in the world. We have the money. It's not like we cannot do this. We just refuse to pay this. This is a choice. Yeah. The weakness of Europe is a choice. It's not something that America gave us. We chose to be that way. And we're saying to each other that we have a program, we have a conference.
Right, Wolfgang, I just wanted to say that I agree with you. I will put it and frame it in a lack of the resolve on what is the aim, what is the ambition, and the Europe is definitely lacking this ambition, both in the case of Ukraine, but again, also in the terms of making itself a place in the world of the type of the world that emerges again from, as you may say, data, numbers, from the type of dependencies that are being not only exploited but created newly, intentionally by China in the areas that deprive us of certain access or resource as Europeans and European economies. Now, we had a big global picture. I wanted to conclude our conversation by looking much more specifically to Germany and Central Europe, and maybe to Germany and Poland in particular. Central Eastern Europe economies have been built on the supply chain, but also value chains that have been tightly, very closely connected with German model. And I don't necessarily say that there is no mercantilist approach in all of the countries of Central Eastern Europe. There might be. That's maybe a follow-up book is needed to evaluate that in detail. But the effect and the interaction and political frictions between those countries and Germany have been quite visible. And I wonder, what do you make out of it? Is there what's the nature from your economic perspective of the tensions that we now observe between Germany and Poland specifically, but possibly other tensions? Like in Slovakia, we have seen tensions about automotive, where the location will be situated, and that had a paramount impact on the political outputs in terms of what politicians deliver, both in Slovakia and in some lands in Germany. So these tensions are now built into the dynamics that you are describing.
Yeah, I mean, we had all hoped that with the election of Friedrich Merz, German-Polish relationships would improve, because they were terrible under Olaf Scholz, and on some level it did. Scholz and Donald Tusk, Merz and Donald Tusk on the same party. There is certainly an agreement on EU politics in general, but Merz, like any German chancellor before him, is, when it comes to the economy, fundamentally a nationalist, and also when it came to immigration, you saw what he did with the borders, and he didn't even think about. I don't think he didn't consider this possibility that it might cause problems in Poland, and I think that was the problem. It's like saying, okay, doing it and knowing it is one thing, but doing it and not knowing it is almost, I think, more offensive in many ways, because it shows a carelessness, it shows like a lack of respect. Now, what I described with Germany has spillover effects, because it affects supply chains. Just as Germany became dependent on other countries absorbing German surpluses, this is the mercantilist thing, Poland, Slovakia, becoming dependent on, downloading their surpluses onto Germany. And that is a model that is just not as sustainable as the German model. So what applies to Germany, that it needs to diversify, applies to Poland and Slovakia as well. And here I'm actually reasonably optimistic, because we can all diversify. Unless we have too many strictures in labor market regulation, bureaucracy. The reason why Germany cannot diversify is because German governments and because the labor law protects each and every factory. It's very hard to close down a factory in Germany. And Germany could have said 10 years ago, let's develop the electric car like the Chinese did, or let's close down the car industry, or let them close it down and we do something else. They didn't do this. So Germany hangs on in there, and they're trying to, still today, Friedrich Merz has these car industry summits in his office. Whenever there is a problem with the economy, all these sort of big companies turn up in the government, and then they talk. This is not the German economy. If you wanted to diversify, you don't talk to one sector. You actually think about the economy on a bigger scale. Nobody in Germany has ever done that. Nobody has, maybe since the 1950s. This is something that they, the traditional thing is certainly since the days of Gerhard Schröder, certainly the sort of modernity, is to prioritize industries and their interests. That's how Nord Stream came about. It was an afterthought to this particular.
Their immediate interests, I think, in exactly. The book you differentiate. Yeah.
That's how this happened. So my criticism of the mercantilism, I was one of the few Germans who opposed Nord Stream, before the war. I mean, everybody's against it now, but before the war, the vast majority of German political commentators, economic commentators, certainly everyone in politics, except for the Green Party, everyone in politics was in favor of the pipeline. And the Green Party was mostly against it because they don't like gas. It was mostly about fossil fuels. It was not so much in those days geopolitical.
Well, apart from Butikofer and geopolitical.
That was later. And Butikofer was indeed somebody who was focused on this. There were some people who had, Robert Habeck himself saw this in a broader context. But the bigger issue for the Greens as a party was they were not as geopolitical 10 years ago as they became since Putin's invasion. So this was a shift that took place inside the party, and I think it took place in the late part of the last decade. So this is the sort of the origin of that, and this is something that Poland, Slovakia, Czech Republic need to take into account when looking at their own economy, because this is not a situation on which you want to strengthen your dependence on Germany and you want to diversify away from it. That doesn't mean there's still also benefits from this indirect. If a German company needs to reduce output, it may keep the Polish side, the Polish factory in place and close down the German factory. But the problem, the way it usually works in Germany, it's harder to close a German, even if the German factory has a lower productivity. It will still be harder for the company and more expensive for the company to close down the less productive factory in Germany than the more productive factory abroad. And that's to do with the way German protectionism works. And it seems like they're protecting jobs, but ultimately they're stopping diversification. So my advice would always be, do what you can, but try to be, for everybody, I would give this advice. This is a world in which we need to diversify, in which we need to change quickly, and not rely on one particular sector. I think a general diversified economy, diversified between industry and services, would work best for everybody. And I would also not have too much of an industrial policy, because the dependency on the answer to our dependency on China is not to do it all ourselves. That's not possible. The answer is to diversify our dependencies. So you have to make sure that we get other sources for this material. Africa. We don't have a strong Africa policy in Europe. Latin America, the Mercosur, is a potentially important. Yeah, we can oppose it because the beef gets cheaper or something, and it's bad for our farmers. Or we find reasons like the 5 German states don't like a Finnish company to make tanks because it's competition. But in the broader things, it's a mistake to oppose this, and I think it's a mistake to oppose the Mercosur deal, because the Mercosur deal gives us another big region in the world that we can partner up for raw materials.
Yeah, and diversify in the longer run. Yeah. Well, fantastic. It was great chatting with you, Wolfgang. We do recommend to our listeners and viewers to subscribe to Eurointelligence, and of course to buy the book Kaput, the exact title, The End of German Miracle, in English, German, Polish, other languages, most likely in Central Europe as well. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
And do stay tuned for more focus on economic security, as we have hosted a forum, Europe Future Forum, that merges the perspective on economic security and the future of enlargement in a multi-annual forum. So I hope we'll be able to host you next year.
Thank you very much.
All right.